A good part of the distance we went on all fours, sometimes holding on by our fingernails. It is the year 1911. A young American crosses the Peruvian jungle. He climbs the steep mountains of the Andes, dragging himself up to snow-capped summits, fiercely determined to find the ruins of the Inca Empire. At a time when the last unexplored areas in the world are being surveyed, Hiram Bingham dreams of an archaeological coup that will make him famous. His discoveries have fascinated and frustrated generations of scholars who followed him. Bingham draws the eyes of the world towards Peru, to the lost site of an ancient civilization situated in a breathtaking mountain location, Machu Picchu. The realm of the Incas was the biggest empire on the American continent. At the end of the 15th century, 9 million people are said to have lived here. Until Francisco Pizarro came in 1533, when the Spaniards conquered the Inca Empire at Sword Point. What remains are stories telling of the origins and the fall of this great Indian empire and of legendary golden treasures. But there's no mention anywhere of the greatest jewel of the Inca Empire, Machu Picchu. The site has kept its secrets until today. Almost a century after its rediscovery, the meaning of these buildings has still not been fully explained. Was Machu Picchu a place of refuge for the Incas, the summer residence of their powerful rulers, or even the home of the legendary virgins of the sun? These mythical explanations have made Machu Picchu South America's greatest tourist attraction. And yet the ruins are endangered. Deep cracks can clearly be seen in the walls of the principal temple. The steep sides of the Andes are prone to landslides. The last one claimed 11 lives. Valencia Zegara takes care of the heritage of the Incas. He and his team are doing everything they can to save the buildings from collapse. But there is another, much more formidable foe.
I've been
working in Machu Picchu since 1968. Back then, only about 100 tourists would come here every day. By the year 2000, their number had risen to between 1,500 and 2,000 a day. And now, there are days when we see 4,000 tourists. That's many more than Machu Picchu can cope with.
In 2007, the site was chosen as one of the new 7 wonders of the world. For years, the archaeologists have been demanding a limit to the number of visitors. Until now, without success. Peru's economy needs each and every tourist. Hiram Bingham is just 12 years old when he first tries to quit his puritanical home. He was born on November 19th, 1875, son of a well-known missionary family in Hawaii. Not really an ideal background for a boy who only dreams of just one thing, becoming an explorer. Hiram empties his bank account to buy tickets, to travel to the American mainland. Now he's just waiting for his friend, Bill. Hiram's irate father sets out to stop what, in his eyes, is merely a madcap adventure. The plan fails. Bingham's friend Bill got scared and spilled the beans. In the coming years, Hiram will excel at high school. 5 years after his first attempt to run away, he finally makes his journey to the mainland to follow the family tradition, studying theology at Yale. A few years later, on November 5th, 1898, Hiram Bingham meets Alfreda Mitchell, a granddaughter of the founder of the Tiffany dynasty. It's love at first sight. They marry and set up home in the splendid surroundings of Yale's Prospect Street. But Bingham wants to be more than just the husband of a wealthy wife. He dreams of a career as a historian and devotes himself to the history of South America. Professor Richard Berger is an anthropologist at Yale. He has studied the life of his predecessor, Hiram Bingham, for many years.
Most people interested in history at the beginning of the 20th century either studied Western European history or American history or the classics, but certainly not Latin America. And when he got his doctorate in Latin American history, there weren't even positions available at the major universities for Latin American historians because it wasn't thought of as an area of sufficient importance to justify a university chair.
On behalf of Yale University, Hiram Bingham takes part in a congress in Bolivia. Then he sets off on a 6-month expedition that will take him to Peru for the first time. At Choqquequirao, there will be a fateful meeting. The regional prefect takes Bingham to see the old Inca site. For a long time, treasure hunters have presumed this place to be Vilcabamba, the last refuge of the Incas in their retreat from the Spanish invaders.
The legendary place from Vilcabamba.
I feel the Bingham blood stirring in my veins as I start for little-known regions, as nearly all my Bingham ancestors for 10 generations have done before.
Mr. Bingham?
But Bingham is not convinced. He considers the site to be too small for a place of such historical significance. From now on, he devotes himself intensely to Inca history, which has always been told from the point of view of the Spanish conquistadors. Under the command of Francisco Pizarro, the Spanish conquered today's Peru in 1523. The Incas fled to Vilcabamba. From there, they resisted the Spaniards until 1572. In Europe, Martin Luther was launching the Reformation. The Portuguese were establishing their first settlements in South America. And in Mexico, Cortés was sealing the fate of the Aztecs. The Spanish conquistadors were dazzled by the riches of the Indians. But for the Incas, gold had no material value. They believed it re-emerged every year from the earth as a gift of the sun god, who thus lent his power and his glory to humanity. For the Incas, the most treasured possessions were textiles. Only the best weavers were allowed to work on them. Their weavings were valuable both for trade and as a crucial mark of status. The reports of Inca gold had a predictable effect. Countless treasure hunters were soon on their way across Peru's mountains and valleys, seeking their fortune. In vain. Hiram Bingham has heard the stories of Inca gold and the refuge of Vilcabamba, which no one has yet managed to find. This could be his chance at fame. By 1910, Bingham makes sure his entry in Who's Who describes him as an explorer, and he is already planning a big expedition. The departure date is set for May 1911. He has just a few months to raise the necessary funds. He doesn't want to use his wife's money to further his career. Bingham is clever. He chooses an area of research that will appeal to the authorities at Yale. He plans to investigate unexplored parts of Peru and intends to discover lost Inca settlements. Mount Corapuna is high on Bingham's list. To be the first person to climb the highest peak in North and South America would draw attention to him and his expedition. Yale agrees to provide part of the budget. Finally, Bingham gives in and lets his wife provide the rest. Bingham wants the Yale Peruvian expedition to be a model of modern scientific enterprise. He gathers sponsorship for his equipment. He tells George Eastman, founder of Kodak, of his plans and asks for his support. Eastman agrees. Kodak will supply the most modern camera and film equipment of the day.
He no doubt felt enormous stress because he had to make discoveries, and he had to make discoveries that were acknowledged by his peers, by other scholars in Latin America.
To meet the high expectations, he assembles a team of 7 members, each with a different specialization. Bingham's expedition is a pioneering exercise in interdisciplinary studies. Harry Foote, a biologist, is to investigate the flora and fauna. Bingham's assistant is a student from a wealthy home, Paul Baxter Lanius. He has lived for several years in Peru and knows the country well. Herman Tucker, an experienced mountaineer, will help with the first goal of the expedition, the ascent of Mount Corapuna. A century later, Valencia Zagara also works with a team from several different disciplines. Zagara has been researching the site for decades, but he has never lost his respect and admiration for the original architects of these unique structures. The Inca built Machu Picchu on an artificial plateau at a height of 2,360 meters, reachable only by steep jungle paths. 216 buildings overall, connected by stone staircases. Aqueducts, fountains, and giant terraced fields are spread over the mountain peaks. All the building material, soil, sand, and stone, was brought to Machu Picchu from the Urubamba Valley. But how could 80-ton blocks be dragged up the steep mountainsides? With the help of ramps, rollers, and levers, thousands of workers brought the great stones upriver and finally dragged them up the mountains. The walls demonstrate the skills and craftsmanship of the builders. Without mortar or cement, these men built walls where every stone fits perfectly on the one beneath. Not even a knife blade fits between them.
The Incas used molds made of clay that allowed them to determine the exact size of each single element of a wall beforehand. The stones would then be cut, polished, and mounted to correspond to these molds.
But Valencia Zagara's archaeological excavations have revealed that the architect's greatest achievement is under the ground. The strength of the town is founded on the terraced fields on the steep mountainsides. On both sides, layers of grass, earth, and stone are held back by walls which support the whole construction. Cuzco is the first stop for the Yale expedition in July 1911. Here in the former Inca capital, Bingham begins the detailed planning of the expedition's route. Where exactly should they begin their search for Vilcabamba? Bingham knows he needs local help. Bingham starts asking around in the streets. Communication with the locals isn't too smooth at first. But finally they are at least given a direction in which to proceed. Bingham has set his sights high to explore the greatest empire in the history of the Americas. It stretched for nearly 5,000 kilometers through today's Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, Ecuador, and Chile. Cusco was the political, religious, and cultural center of the empire. This is where the Inca rulers lived, and here they had impressive buildings erected as an appropriate setting for their power. But since the modern city was built on the foundations of the Inca walls, only the remains of the Inca capital can still be seen. A Spanish chronicler would later write, "This town is the best and the biggest I have seen in this country or anywhere else on the American continent." But Bingham has no eyes for the beauty of Cusco. He turns to the rector of Cusco's university for advice. Albert Giesecke knows the country and its people well. He tells Bingham about a ride he once made along the Urubamba River.
Buenos días. Bienvenido.
The rector tells Bingham of a man who may serve as their guide, since he knows the area around Cusco perfectly. The man's name? Melchior Arteaga. Bingham is electrified. Where can he find this man? Giesecke produces a map and points the Americans the way to where Arteaga lives, to Mandor Pampa. Following the ancient paths, Bingham's expedition proceeds from Cusco into the Urubamba Valley. To ensure that the ruler's instructions could be transmitted even to the most distant parts of the empire, a network of roads, more than 30,000 kilometers long, was built. At 6,000 kilometers, the King's Road, connecting the north and the south of the empire, was the longest road in the world. Bingham's team march for 3 days through difficult country. Bingham takes his first photographs, capturing the savage majesty of the Andes. He has secured the help of the Peruvian government in his search for the Inca cities. Sergeant Carrasco will time and again prove a reliable companion. In Mandor Pampa, farmer Melchior Arteaga has already heard about this special visitor.
Bienvenidos, por favor, tomen asiento, tomen asiento.
With the help of an interpreter, Bingham tells Arteaga that the other members of the expedition will arrive in a few days.
Ah, no hay problema. Tomen asiento, por favor, señor. Sírvanse, sírvanse. Mujer.
Bueno. Buenos días.
Arteaga invites his guests to share a meal of corn and coca tea, the main crops of the region. Agriculture is still Peru's biggest industry. The Andes are a landscape of extremes. A single day can see temperature swings of up to 40 degrees Celsius. That's 70 degrees Fahrenheit. The people here have made good use of the different climatic zones for thousands of years. If a harvest fails in one zone, a good harvest in another may compensate for the loss. Scientists believe that the Incas even laid out experimental fields. One impressive example is this structure at Moray, where the different terraces are exposed to different amounts of sunlight. Here, the Incas tested the best conditions for their crops. In Machu Picchu, too, the largest areas were used for farming. The Incas dug artificial terraces into the steep mountainsides, which they filled with fertile soil. These food-growing areas served not only to feed the population, they were also an instrument of power.
For the social organization of the Incas, The supply of food and its distribution among the population was an important matter. The food was stored in depots called kolkas. Therefore, an army could be recruited at any time, and the people would never starve. That is how the Incas could extend their power over large parts of South America.
In Bingham's time, the terraces were used by the local farmers. Agustin Lizarraga came to the Urubamba Valley with his family in 1894. They wanted to take advantage of the good farming conditions. Now they grow potatoes all round the ruined city, selling them in the markets at Cusco and the villages nearby. They know nothing about the coming visit by an American from Yale, which will change their life forever. Hiram Bingham and his men have reached a point just below the high plateau, about which they too are completely ignorant. On the 24th of July, 1911, at 10 o'clock in the morning, Bingham has waited long enough. The heavy rain of the last few days has turned the expedition's camp into a swamp. The farmer has told the American of some ruins on the summit of the mountain. Bingham urges Arteaga to lead him to the site, right now.
No, es imposible. No lloviendo, es peligroso. Está lloviendo, Carrasco. No entiendo. Quiere subir arriba, pero
Bingham insists that they go there, but the Indian is reluctant. The paths are wet. It's too dangerous to tackle them in this state. Tomorrow, he says. Tomorrow. A silver dollar persuades the farmer to change his mind. That's 4 times what Arteaga earns in a month.
I characterize him as someone of enormous ambition and drive, almost obsessive, a desire to succeed, a kind of toughness and austerity in some ways that one doesn't often find.
In his diary, Bingham writes, 10:45 a.m. Arteaga, Carrasco, and I set off on foot. The climb up on the mountain opposite was not for mules. Bingham has difficulty keeping up with Arteaga and Carrasco. He stops to take some photos and to have a short rest. It is a tough job. The paths are, as Arteaga had predicted, difficult to climb because of the rain. And the rivers are little less than torrents at this time of year. Every weary step takes Bingham further and further into the past, and nearer to the vanished empire of the Incas. But even Bingham reaches his limits here, as he confides in his diary. The humidity was great. We were in the belt of maximum precipitation in eastern Peru. The heat was excessive, and I was not in training. Quite unexpectedly, the Yale explorers team encounters some settlers right in the middle of the rainforest. Bingham records the event. 12:07, arrive hut, curiosity of farmers, sweet potatoes. Arteaga introduces Bingham to the Alvarez family. The guide prefers to stay here at their hut. From now on, 8-year-old Pablito Alvarez will accompany Bingham. The two set out with Sergeant Carrasco. It's only a few more 100 meters to the top. They have trouble following the boy through the dense jungle. But their exertions and efforts are rewarded. 2 men and a child are standing before one of the most spectacular archaeological sites in the world. Shortly before 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they reach a plateau. In front of them lies a city, completely overgrown by the jungle. Impressed by the extraordinary layout of the ruins, Bingham begins to take photographs. These are the only pictures that show Machu Picchu in the state in which it was first discovered. In his diary, Bingham describes his first impressions. Fine ruins, houses, streets, stairs, finely cut stone. One building in particular attracts him. Next to it, on a mound, there is a carved stone column. The Quechua word for it is Intihuatana, the place where the sun is bound. Before the Spanish came, almost every Inca site had Intihuatanas like this one, but the conquistadors destroyed the columns to put a stop to what they saw as a heathen cult of the sun. Bingham had found one of the last remaining Intihuatanas at Machu Picchu, clear evidence that the Spanish never discovered the city. He noted, surprise followed surprise, until there came the realization that we were in the midst of as wonderful ruins as any ever found in Peru. It seemed almost incredible that this city, only 5 days' journey from Cusco, should have remained so long undescribed and comparatively unknown. Pablito seems to bring Bingham good luck. He knows other secret spots. The boy takes a fascinated Bingham to the steep crevice of a terraced field. There he shows him an elaborately worked fountain. The Incas worshipped the sun as the fixed point around which their culture revolved. Their powerful ruler, Pachacuti, extended the religion of the sun god Inti. He announced that the Inca ruler was the direct descendant of the sun. But the extreme environment they lived in, with its flooding and droughts, also influenced the beliefs of the population. They worshipped other gods too, gods that represented different forces of nature. Apart from the sun, water was the divinity most important to the Incas.
Most of the population were farmers. They suffered severely under the weather phenomenon known as El Niño. Sometimes there would be no rain for years, and the drought would lead the people into despair. Or there were times when it would never stop raining, and the water flooded the fields. So it wasn't surprising that the people saw the water god as a supernatural being who controlled the atmosphere.
The Incas didn't just propitiate the water god with rituals and sacrifice. In Machu Picchu, they solved the problem themselves. One of their architects' greatest achievements is the construction of a water system. The water reaches Machu Picchu from a spring on the summit at 3,000 meters through an 800-meter-long channel, a veritable aqueduct. Kenneth Wright runs a paleohydrological institute in Denver, Colorado. He has researched the water system at Machu Picchu for years. His investigations have revealed that in the heyday of the town, 200 centimeters of rain fell every year. it would hardly have been necessary to irrigate the terraced fields. The inhabitants of Machu Picchu didn't suffer the periods of drought that were common in other parts of the Inca Empire. They had to combat flooding. But the Inca architects found a solution.
One of the things that impressed me the most was the urban drainage system that was created by the Inca to take care of excess rainfall. A series of channels and underground conduits, in effect, to carry the water away. And without that good drainage system, Machu Picchu would have slipped down the mountain many years ago.
Hiram Bingham takes photographs for many hours on that first day. He shoots panoramas and details to get the fullest possible record of his discovery. These photos are invaluable to archaeologists even today. And there are Bingham's stenographic descriptions in his diary. Best long niches under great stone with curved stonework on upper side and nicely finished inside. Windows on other side. Views on both sides. Whole place extremely inaccessible. As night falls, after just 5 hours, the small group leaves the plateau to return to their camp. But then Bingham orders the sergeant to stay behind. Something strange has caught his eye. They pass a worked field and several sacks of potatoes. Bingham can't believe it. The fields of Machu Picchu are still in use. An inscription spoils the Americans' dream of glory. Lizarraga, 1902. Someone else has already immortalized himself as the discoverer of Machu Picchu. Agustin Lizarraga returns to his field at Machu Picchu in the twilight. Together with his friend, Gavino Sanchez, he wants to collect his potatoes, as he has done for years. But something's different today. Agustin Lizarraga senses that someone has been here. The Indio, who has lived here for years, is suspicious. His grandson, Romulo, still lives here, near Machu Picchu. For almost 20 years, he's been a tourist guide here.
The real discoverers of Machu Picchu were Agustin Lizarraga, Gavino Sanchez, Melchior Arteaga, and the other farmers who were here before Bingham.
In the Urubamba Valley, great stretches of land were marked out every year, and the trees burned. On the 14th of July, 1901, the flames went out of control.
The fire leapt into the skies above Machu Picchu and the neighboring forests. But thanks to the fire, in July 1901, Agustin Lizarraga discovered the Inca Road, cleared by the flames. That's how he found the site.
But it wasn't only Lizarraga and the other farmers who knew of the existence of Machu Picchu before Hiram Bingham. A mysterious map clearly indicates the ruined city at exactly the right place. It was drawn by a man named Hermann Göring. He was working as an engineer for the Peruvian government and was tasked with finding a route from the interior to the Pacific. Göring's map is dated 1874. At that time, Hiram Bingham wasn't even born. The explorer's urge draws the young American on. His team has followed the Urubamba River upstream in search of Vilcabamba, the legendary refuge of the Incas. Impatiently, Bingham urges them on. Deep in the canyon, Bingham's team penetrates further and further into the Urubamba Valley. Here, the Incas are said to have resisted the Spaniards for 40 years. And in Espiritu Pampa, the plain of the spirits, the archaeologists find what they are looking for. But the ruins of Vilcabamba are less imposing than Machu Picchu. Bingham is unsure. Later research will prove conclusively that Vilcabamba was indeed situated in the plain of the spirits. But on the basis of his first observations, Bingham comes to the wrong conclusion. He believes Machu Picchu to have been the last refuge of the Incas. And Bingham, ever restless, already has his next goal in mind. First, he sends Herman Tucker and his assistant, Paul Baxter Lanius, back to Machu Picchu, the old peak in Quechua. In 3 weeks, they free the entire site from the vegetation covering it. They hire Arteaga, Alvarez, and Lizarraga to work for them. Then Tucker and Baxter Lanius start measuring the ruins. It's a task that calls for much improvisation, but by the end, they've done a thorough job.
Okay.
The map Tucker and Baxter Lanius made is still the basis of all later cartographic and architectural depictions of Machu Picchu. Ever the adventurer, Bingham now concentrates on achieving the original goal of his 1911 expedition. Bingham and Tucker make it to the summit of Mount Korapuna, more dead than alive. They believe it is the highest mountain in the Western Hemisphere. But when they reach the top, they see that the neighboring summit seems even higher. Later they learn that Mount Aconcagua in Argentina is the highest mountain on the American continent. In 1912, Hiram Bingham leads a second expedition to Machu Picchu. George Eaton is in charge of the excavations. He is an osteologist. His job is to examine all the bones that are found. Hiram Bingham is only planning to stay for 2 weeks to take photographs. He has new goals elsewhere in Peru. He has still not realized that Machu Picchu is the discovery that is going to make him famous. Meanwhile, under the direction of George Eaton, the workers are ordered to force their way into the buildings. What will the team find in the abandoned Inca site? Gold? Silver? Expectations couldn't be higher. But the finds are disappointing. Clay vessels, bronze, a few silver objects, and skeletons. George Eaton is infected with Hiram Bingham's enthusiasm. He finds 50 graves containing about 160 skeletons. On the return to the United States, Eaton analyzes the bones, and he comes to a sensational conclusion. He identifies 85% of the skeletons as female. From this, Eaton and Bingham conclude, as Bingham wrote, that it is quite possible that the forgotten citadel of Machu Picchu was the safest place for the flight of the Virgins of the Sun. As the Incas saw it, the Virgins of the Sun belonged to the sun god. but also as representatives on Earth, the Incas, for whom they would cook, sing, and weave. Officials throughout the empire selected the most beautiful 10-year-old girls and brought them to Cuzco, to the Temple of the Virgins of the Sun. Its site is now taken up by the convent of Santa Catalina. The skeletons discovered in Machu Picchu in 1912 are preserved at Yale University. John Verano has re-examined them. Just as in 1912, a skeleton is assembled. Then, it is examined. The dimensions of the bones, especially the hips, the neck of the femur, and the skull, are carefully measured. Verano comes to a surprising conclusion that throws the results of the Bingham expedition into question.
In the end, the first question about demography, age, and sex turned out to be quite different from what Dr. Eaton had found. I found that, in fact, there was not a great preponderance of females. There was not exactly 50-50, but approximately the same number of adult males and females. Another thing I started finding were bones of children and even infants.
Bingham and Eaton made another mistake. Near Cuzco, Bingham discovered another set of bones. Eaton estimated their age at 30,000 years. This would be the time of Ice Age man. It later turned out that the bones were the remains of domestic cattle. Bingham had trouble coming to grips with the interpretation of his discovery. The temple with 3 windows led him to see in Machu Picchu not just the refuge of the Virgins of the Sun, but also Tampu Tocco, the legendary first settlement of the Incas. But this theory was mistaken too. Analysis of the architectural style and the many finds here have since shown that Machu Picchu was built around the year 1450, long after the Inca Empire came into being. In Machu Picchu, Bingham and his colleagues found 555 clay vessels, 200 bronze objects, copper, silver, and ceramics. Most of this was arrebalance, artistically decorated pots, in which drinking water, or chicha, the traditional maize beer, was transported. Bingham also worried whether he could really claim to have discovered Machu Picchu. In 1912, on his return from Peru, he wrote a letter to one of his old teachers in Honolulu. I suppose that in the same sense of the word as it is used in the expression, Columbus discovered America, it is fair to say that I discovered Machu Picchu. The Norsemen and French fishermen undoubtedly visited North America long before Columbus crossed the Atlantic. On the other hand, it was Columbus who made America known to the civilized world. In the same sense of the word, I discovered Machu Picchu.
Very often people will say that Bingham was the first scientific discoverer of Machu Picchu, and maybe that's a good phrase to use. Bingham was really the first outsider who came, documented the site, and then made it known to the rest of the world.
A year and a half after his discovery, Bingham still doesn't know that Machu Picchu will make him famous. The National Geographic Society is holding its annual dinner in the old Willard Hotel in Washington. The guest of honor is Roald Amundsen, who reached the North Pole in December 1911. Hiram Bingham is one of the guests. Bingham makes good use of the occasion. He's brought along a selection of his most striking photographs of Machu Picchu. Gilbert Grosvenor, the publisher of National Geographic magazine, makes him a remarkable offer. The next day, his portrait appears on the front page of the Washington Post. Bingham has finally arrived. The Inca explorer now receives the recognition he has sought for so long. In April 1913, National Geographic magazine devotes an entire edition to Machu Picchu, but Bingham is still having trouble interpreting his finds. Machu Picchu was neither the point of origin nor the last refuge of Inca civilization, and his theory that this was the refuge of the Virgins of the Sun was soon rejected. Later, Bingham's son Alfred would write, "Although he had at first view so underrated its significance, its appeal finally gripped him, and as its fame grew, he desperately tried to give it a historical importance." In the meantime, the situation in Peru is becoming uncomfortable. The Americans are accused of grave robbing. A group of Peruvian archaeologists are formed to save their culture from the Yankees. They claim that Bingham didn't even have a permit for his excavations. With the help of the press, they try to discredit Hiram Bingham and his team. Bingham's greatest adversary is the publisher of the high-circulation newspaper El Comercio. He is an amateur archaeologist and president of the Cusco Historical Society. Luis Valcarcel finally has the excavations closed down. Hiram Bingham has to stop his work in Machu Picchu. But the greatest puzzle remains. Why was the city of Machu Picchu built? Some believe it was a country residence of the ruling family. Other archaeologists share the opinion of Machu Picchu expert Valencia Zegara.
Machu Picchu es una ciudad incaica.
Machu Picchu was the capital of an important Inca province. It connected the eastern flank of the Andes with the Amazonian plain. It was an administrative center because from here the different areas of the region were governed. All the information collected was then passed on to the central government in Cusco.
Every year we learn more about Machu Picchu. It is now possible to make a detailed reconstruction of this mountaintop settlement, and yet there are still many unanswered questions. The city in the clouds was obviously not simply abandoned. Everything points to a planned departure. The site was left in perfect condition. Hiram Bingham finds a new occupation after his expeditions. Everything this missionary's son attempts is a success. He joins the U.S. military, serves in France in World War I, and becomes a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And he's always good at one thing, making headlines. He flies an airship over Washington. Nothing especially remarkable about that. But Bingham lands directly in front of the Capitol. He enters politics as a Republican. In 1924, he is elected governor of Connecticut, and later goes to Washington as a senator. In 1932, Bingham turns to business. He becomes director of a major bank and earns a fortune. In 1948, he returns to Machu Picchu for the last time. The new road to the summit is named Carretera Hiram Bingham. Bingham dies on June 6, 1956. He is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Hiram Bingham lived for his dream of becoming a famous explorer. In the mountains of Peru, he found what he was looking for. A city that remains a mystery, even after 100 years. The mystery of Machu Picchu.